Hi, I'm Teddy Varno, as was just mentioned, and I'm the chair of the Social Studies Department at Oakwood. And we're very fortunate because we have an elective that I teach every election year on campaigns and elections. So during the fall term, I have an entire course devoted to campaigns and elections for 11th and 12th graders. So it's a really kind of great opportunity in there. And lately it's been a really hard class to teach for obvious reasons if you've been following the news, right, for the last 2 or 3 years. It's a really kind of, it's really challenging to teach political topics in this day and age. And especially anything that sort of touches in the kind of extreme polarized political climate we have in terms of just having students be able to express themselves and do it in a way that's respectful, but at the same time really honest, right? We are in trying times, right? It's not like we're not. And so one of the things I would just mention is some of the best experiences I've had teaching this class are related to experiential ed components of the class. We do a lot on national politics, and as I said, it's often very depressing, right? We're looking at things that are troubling, and a lot of what's going on at the national level is troubling. But there are two things that students do that I think actually encourages them and makes them want to be more involved in the process. One is we spend a lot of time looking at the ballot initiatives and actually researching ballot initiatives in local government. And whereas national government, we see a lot of failings and a lot that's going wrong and everything feels terrible when you watch the news, that's not always the case when you look at local and state government. And getting the students to recognize that democracy isn't just what's going on in Washington, but what is actually going on in the city and in the state is really important. So what we do with ballot initiatives is the students create a voting guide. We basically act as an editorial board as a classroom. And each of them sort of divvies up a different initiative to look at, and then we bring, they do research, and then we come together and they create a guide that's meant to inform voters. And we create it in the form of a PDF file that they can send to people. So it's a way of doing voter information. This year, I'm also going to do judges, because that's something that I know voters have trouble understanding anything about a judge. They look at judges and they just have no info to go on. So having the students really try to do some investigative work on profiling judges just to provide voters with information. And that's something that's always very encouraging to them.
How do they profile those judges based on the cases they've adjudicated in the past?
Maybe, although that's hard. I'm only saying this from my own experience trying to find out information on the judges. It's really tough. There's just not a lot. I think for some of them, because some of them are not people who are currently judges, right? It might be as simple as contacting the person and doing an interview, right? Which is like what journalists will do. Some of the best stuff you see is someone just picked up the phone and called the person to find out anything about them. But it's often really hard, right? If you've ever gone to, and you have a lot of them, and you're not sure. So I think of it as like teaching the students to fill a role in the democratic process that might not be there. And they actually come out of that feeling very good. Like after doing that, we ended up having a long discussion of daylight savings time, right? Which seems absolutely obscure, but they learned an awful lot about kind of how the system works around that. So that's one of the sort of service learning style things I've done that's successful. The other is that students in California, if they're over the age of 16, can serve as poll workers. And so we have had as many as 3/4 of the class, I think, for some of these sections, serve as poll workers on election day. And that process is fantastic because it really changes their view on how voting works, to have spent the entire day with voters, even if they're not able to vote, right? They're not old enough to vote. They can sit there and watch people vote. I know a lot of students came away super excited because they were seeing people going into the polling places holding note cards where they had taken their own notes on the ballot initiatives, right? And they had this sense that voters actually were paying attention, that despite what you see in the news and this kind of extreme hyperpolarization in the way that everything feels terrible, people are paying attention, right? The system is more than just what we see on the news. It's actually the people who are involved in voting and being a part of the process. And then what I always do out of that is the students do a project after the election on on electoral reform. And some of them will do topics that you're probably familiar with, like gerrymandering or public financing, but I get a lot of students doing topics like provisional balloting, right? Things that they actually experience as poll workers and wanted to learn more about. And so they get into sort of the nitty-gritty of the electoral process in a way that's kind of exciting. So I felt that focusing in some ways on local government, some of these service learning opportunities, is a way to get around the overwhelming feeling of awfulness that we sometimes get when we watch what's happening in Washington and we watch kind of national politics, which can feel very depressing, right? And very the whole process feels very inhumane in a lot of ways, right? The way things are going. But the local government can feel, local and state can feel a lot more encouraging and give them venues where they feel like they actually can do something and feel like they're part of the process. So it's also great because they suddenly find themselves experts on things that adults don't know. Like people around them who are adults don't know how to vote on these initiatives, and they can actually talk to them about what they mean, and that's kind of exciting when you're not able to vote, right? That you can actually participate in the process in that way. People aren't likely to change their vote on super partisan office holders, right? But they will change their vote on these local issues, or they're just thinking about them and they're trying to form an opinion, and it's like, you can actually do something.
Are you finding the detachment that this other gentleman was speaking of?
I wouldn't say detachment. I find more like anger that's hard to deal with analytically sometimes. Right, the students have very strong feelings, and I don't want to tell them they're wrong very often, because like these are hard times, but it's very hard to get them to sort of step back and think objectively about processes the way it used to be maybe 4 years ago when I was teaching a lot. It was much easier to step back and say, let's look at parties and where they come from, or let's look at partisanship. But I don't really sense detachment. Our students have been pretty active in climate change lately and gun control in particular. Like we had a lot of students involved in those issues, and Teva, who's going to speak, is doing voter registration. So we actually have a pretty good wave of students interested. One thing I will say is, I feel like it's like there is a really high bar of entry to knowledge about what's going on in government right now if you haven't been following the last 3 years. And I run into that. I run into students who just can't make sense of what this is all about because they were in the 2016 election, they were maybe in elementary school and not really, like they're not looking at the ins and outs of these little things. So in some ways the information it's just hard to kind of make sense of things if you haven't been like, it's like, I feel like right now national politics is like walking into the 4th season of an HBO series, right? Like if you haven't been watching it from season 1, you're gonna be like, what in the world is this, right? Like there are things that are just gonna feel like they've come out of nowhere. But that seems to be more of the problem I've seen.
You mentioned that they create a voter information packet.
Yeah.
Who do they share that with? Like, is it parents? Is it?
It's whoever they want. I share it with the faculty. I just send it out to our server, the school, so they know it's going to like their teachers. So that, and again, their names are not, it's not like they recommend, we sort of treat it like an editorial board where
Sure.
we've discussed it and the group kind of writes its pieces, right? But then I give each of them a copy so that they can send it to whoever asks. So so it's a lot of their, adults they know who just want to have something sitting next to them when they're voting. Yeah.
Want to expand that?
Oh, that's it, to a wider circle? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would love to, and I end up with, it's interesting because I have 2 sections usually, because I end up doing a pretty detailed simulation where one section is Republican and one is Democrat, and we run through the primary process in the general election. So I end up with 2 different voting guides. They're not playing their part, they're just playing themselves. But it's interesting to see where the different sections diverge, which things they advocate, which they're, which ones they're all on board with, and which ones there's divergences. And you can sort of see that when you look at the 2 side by side. And they also have to think there's a lot of information out there on designing materials, so they have to think about what a good design is for reaching the public. So they think about things like the colors they're using, the fonts they're using, just basic outreach if you're trying to like reach the public because you don't know who your reader's going to be and you want to be as simple, using language that would be easily understood, for example, and not writing too much. So.
And add ECSL to your distribution list, and I'll send it out to everybody.
Awesome.
We'll post it on our webpage, and we'll send it out to all the schools.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, that'd be great.
Just one other question.
Yeah. Did you have
Yeah. Do you assign them a role, like a debate where this group is a Republican, this group is representing Democrat?
I do in the simulation, but not in the voter guide. For the voter guide, they're on their own. So they gather the info and then they make a presentation of the group and then the group debates it.
How often do you find that students, as they become more educated, switch their party?
Oh, I would say one of the outcomes of campaigns of this class is that everybody moves away from wherever they started. Students don't necessarily become conservative or liberal, but wherever they are, they become less certain by the end of the course. And that's just because they're exposed to thinking about the processes, and I think they become a little less...
Just repeating what they've heard at home.
Yeah, they become a little less certain on where they stand. on both sides. I've seen that on both sides. It's rare for a student to become sort of more extreme after this class in their beliefs. They usually become a little less. Yeah.
Do you find any pushback from parents on this class?
No, it's pretty popular with the kids, and our community is generally like into politics. Like we have a fairly political community in a lot of ways. But the school, I think, puts social justice as one of its central mission statements, and so that kind of lends itself to this being seen as central to our curriculum. This kind of stuff is really kind of a lot what we do. Yeah. So I've never really encountered. I've encountered, actually this is very helpful, I've encountered a lot of parents who want to help out in terms of like speaking to the class if they've run for office or that kind of stuff, which can be really great. Thank you.